First, let me suggest to Brother Bruce's point, at the very least, some of that community passion pressed the envelope to such a degree that General WREG, as Brother Hutchinson pointed out earlier, called some of us bullies for doing what the first presenter requested that we do, and that's simply demand for us to be treated with the fair, just, and equitable type of responses that we deserve as we've been promised transparency and accountability. I personally wrote an open letter to Amy WREG that I think helped to build some of that particular traction. And we were in meetings that people called, that people infiltrated. I actually infiltrated one myself. And I think those are the things that help to create an environment whereby General WREG and others realized, to the chagrin of Brother Quinn, that business as usual is no longer acceptable. To that point, as we start talking about responsible journalism, I remain concerned and this is from the perspective of one who has been interviewed more times than I care to count. I continue to be concerned about the low standard of research and responsibility that is being perpetuated by many of our journalists, that many journalists will say in closed rooms is a byproduct of what is being demanded from their producers and the people who oversee them. So to what degree do we start not just holding law enforcement officers and agencies accountable, but our media outlets accountable too, for more fair and responsible journalism? Because irresponsible journalism is perpetuating the problem that makes things like the bridge become a modest response in consideration of the broad injustices that so many of us are facing. And I'll say this lastly, and I'm hoping that everybody could respond to these musings or inquiries. If the environment is structured towards injustice, if people are, even in good faith, trying to do responsible journalism and being met with all of these roadblocks and, Brother Corey says, impediments, to what degree does it become the media's responsibility to more accurately communicate that consistently and stop simply acting as if what the law enforcement officers and agencies are doing is somehow acceptable?
Well, let me jump in by saying this. First of all, thank you for your questions. First thing I've learned, never to discuss with you chatter in the building. And this was because I would always believe that if I have, I apologize. But the second thing is that we have held state lawmakers, city officials, the mayor, the district attorney, their feet to the fire. We've done that. We've done that repeatedly. We have done that constantly. We've raised the issue about body cameras in the video. Deborah Fessenden, are you here? Am I right? You're right. We've raised the issue about the TBI and the secrecy. We've done that repeatedly. Bruce's reporting raised the issue of why not. We're journalists. We're journalists. We're not policymakers. We're not lawyers. Do we tell people that? Of course we do. That's what we do repeatedly. He raises a good point. If we put it out there and tell you that the system is perhaps crooked or is not fair or there are roadblocks, it's your job. It's your job. It's your job to go out there and tell the people that listen and follow you, the system is crooked. Now we need to go and mobilize to fix the system. Yolanda does a great job of telling you the truth. You hear the truth? What are you going to do about it? That's your job. That's your job. We investigate, we report, and we're not asking you to decide, but you should. So it's your job.
I don't see the Tri-State Defender as outside of the conversation. I think that what we're being asked to do by our editor and publisher is that he's asking us to be more assertive. and he's asking us to be more aggressive in going after and exploring some of the issues that the Reverend Fisher is talking about. But what we also do is that we try to make sure that we give a portal, an avenue for those issues to be raised by Reverend Fisher.
But I think we do. I think, I mean, the commercial appeal. God, where's Mark? One of the greatest pieces ever written was the Stephen Askew stuff. Brilliant reporting. Yolanda does brilliant reporting. Bruce and his team does brilliant reporting. WMC does brilliant reporting. You guys with Jenny DePrizio, excellent reporting. We dig, we break stories, we uncover. What else? I mean, we give them portals. We give them Facebook. We give them Twitter. We've embraced social media. At some point, you know.
What is it that you're recoiling from? I'm not getting that.
I guess what I'm wondering is, what else are we supposed to do?
I can answer it.
We do that.
Half of your coverage is on crime.
And we cover other stories as well.
50% of Memphis is not crime.
I would agree with you on that.
Look, when you talk to the people of Memphis, when you go out in the community and you talk to people who watch our television station and you ask them, you know, what's going on in your neck of the woods? What are you interested in? What are you not interested in? What are you worried about? What keeps you up at night? And oftentimes we're told by them, unaided, that it's issues of public safety, and you certainly academically can make an argument. Well, they're terrified of what's out there because that's all they get spoon-fed with is stories about crime. But when you sit and talk to these people around a table, and you just ask them, do you feel safe? Well, yeah, I feel safe because I've got 2 Dobermans and a Glock on the bedside table next to me. Yeah, I feel safe. They're concerned about what's going on 2 doors down from them, what's going on in the neighborhood. They're concerned about the change.
I have the mic. I think it's my turn. Yeah. All right. My question is to the gentleman on the end from WREG. You stated when you began that you stated that you push the people in power for information. And I wanted to know, when you push the TBI for information, why is it that the information doesn't reveal the truth if it's true? Because you mentioned several cases of what the TBI was handling. You forgot the one where I was stalking a judge. I'm P. Moses, and you did a lot of coverage on that, and you took the information that they gave you. And I don't want to make this about me, but the TBI agent is no longer employed with TBI. His name was Ryan Fletcher, and the news never covered that. So with Darrius Stewart's matter, you mentioned Justin Thompson. The news, do you feel that y'all have a responsibility not only to report the information accurately, but to connect the dots? I don't hear anybody saying that Justin Thompson went to the same school as Darrius Stewart, which was Wooddale. I didn't hear anybody cover that. I didn't hear anybody cover the fact that Justin Thompson, you covered a bunch of false allegations about Darrius Stewart being having warrants for sexual things, but no one said anything about the people that were with him when he was actually stopped. No one did any in-depth coverage about that. And I think that if you did, you may would have found some clues to this puzzle of why Darrius Stewart was killed. Now, the Department of Justice has rendered its decision. Has anyone in the news inquired to see if that Department of Justice who handled that investigation was solely based out of Memphis, or was it a collaborative effort with DC? Because in my experience, and I say this matter-of-factly, with all the powers to be in this room, there are a lot of things that get covered up here in Memphis from the beginning. And if you do not get someone who is outside of Memphis to really look at that, or maybe journalists to look at it and ask the right questions, you will never find the right answers. So do you feel that you have a responsibility to maybe dig deeper? I'm not criticizing anything that you've covered because you've covered what you were given. But as a responsible journalist, do you feel that it's imperative that you connect all the dots with all the situations, which basically goes all the way back to the person who has the power, just like they got an indictment for me stalking a judge the day before the courts close, has the same power to indict Connor Schilling for murder?
I think it's important for us to dig always. Of course, every single case that the TBI has, we don't have the resources to go through every single case in their case file. But I do think it's important for us to look at cases and examine whether or not they have touched a lot of bases and whether there are gaps in what they've dealt with. I think when we look at what happened in the Darrius Stewart case, we tried our best to relay to the audience on digitally, online, as well as on television, who they talked to, how they talked to them, but it's impossible to distill a stack of information that's deep and make sure that everything gets out there. But we do try to disseminate as much as we can, and we think it's important for the public to have access to that information because, especially in this day, everybody's a reporter. Everybody's an editor. You have more power now than you ever did to gather information. And so I encourage everybody in this room to dig as much as they possibly can.
I want to go back. I'm Eric, I'm publisher of the Memphis Daily News, and we do a show on WKNL. And I think that in some way it's great to talk about the Darrius Stewart case because it brings up all these national issues and these local issues. And I think the journalists in the room should give themselves credit that they put pressure on people like Amy WREG to disclose information that they didn't want to disclose. And I think we should congratulate ourselves on that because so much attention, imperfectly, was put on that case. I would say, though, back to your point about people saying they don't feel safe, it's pretty clear that one reason people don't feel safe is because of coverage and over-coverage of last night's murder. And the endless parade of black male mugshots with no context, no follow-up, that's not helpful. It's just not. Now we're like Karanja said, we don't cover day-to-day crime, and that's and I'm happy that I can do that. But for those of you who do, and you have every right to, and there are people who are interested, you've got to find more context. What you're doing is you're just putting up there that there was some sort of murder last night in Midtown without the context that it's between two people who know each other, that it's a domestic violence event. All the follow-up, the stuff that comes out as that case is investigated. So instead what you do is you create the impression that me living in Midtown, I'm at risk because there's somebody down the street who's going to murder me. And that's not what's going on. As she said about Lemoyne Owen, all kinds of great things are going on in that neighborhood, not just last night's murder. When Mark Paraskia does a deep dive on some sort of history of crime or some sort of investigation, that's awesome. That's fantastic. It sheds some light on what's going on in crime in Memphis and the community. Last night's murder and just putting up a mugshot and never following up on it doesn't help anyone. And I think that all of journalism really has to take a look at itself about what sort of stereotypes they are perpetuating by doing that.
Well, I appreciate your passion, but I can say from speaking with a multitude of groups of people who don't just live in East Memphis and Midtown, people across the entire fabric of the community, when you ask, what are you worried about? They tell me about something that happened down the street from them, and they're not talking about the murder that we had on the air last night. They're talking about the guy who's broken into the houses around them. They're talking about the petty thievery, and they are worried about somebody who got killed in the block behind them. Look, crime in this community affects everybody, and I think it is very easy for us just to want to push it away and want to ignore it. But there are costs. There are raw costs about policing and emergency response, but there are opportunity costs to the human capital that is dead on the street because we can't get a handle on our crime problem. And if we just want to ignore it, hey, fine, but it is a real issue in this community, and we've got to attack it.
I don't hear the people saying that they want it ignored, that they're saying that they want it in context.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think that we have done.
Go ahead.
One of the things I think that we have done is crime was an issue. It was one of the deciding factors in the mayor's campaign. After that, we continued, and I think all of us here at this table used again investigative and accountability to ask what was the next moves going to be. What was going to move with his police director? What's going to happen with we looked at the causes of this symptom, the hiring, the officers that were leaving, the reasons that they were leaving. We look at crime tracker. We put it into perspective. We just did a piece a couple of weeks ago saying how many people who actually killed each other knew each other out of an argument. I think all of us here at this table have gone just beyond that 20-second reader. We've looked into the causes of it.
Is it time for me to ask my question? All right, let me step up. My good New York brother notwithstanding, I need to just make a couple observations and ask you a question. Ask all of you a question. First of all, for every positive news reporter you've cited that is going beyond the pale and doing their job, there are some that don't understand that Lemoyne-Owen College and Stax Museum are both in South Memphis, and they're only a block away from each other. And so Stax can't be in Midtown. And Lemoyne-Owen in South Memphis, and they still don't have the geography right because they think that Whitehaven is South Memphis. South Memphis has become a code word for a lot of things that are happening in this community, and that needs to be said. Second thing is, notwithstanding my good acquaintance and journalist from the Memphis Daily News, if it weren't for the activism of a lot of people on the ground, you wouldn't have a TBI report, let alone it being released to the public, because I have a witness in this room that we sat down with the general, WREG, and we sat down with her. We had 6 clergy that represented 100,000 congregants, and we said, y'all need to do something quick, or else we're going to have a serious problem in this community. And less than 24 hours later, she said, I have the report, and I'm going to read it. So just want to put that out on the table, too. There was a lot of groundswell, and I'm sure you can respond to this, too, from the community that said, in light of some of the things that we've been hearing, in light of some of the articles that have been written in terms of what hasn't been taking place in terms of indictments, you need to do something, and we're not going to let it pass on this case. That's why this case was so pivotal, and that's why this case is a little different than others. But with all of that being said, and this may be more appropriate for the next session, but I'm going to ask it here. Do you think there's a way to allow this area to be more of an open shop in terms of disclosure on certain information? Because I was in another workshop where they said it's hard to get things under the Freedom of Information Act in this community, extremely hard. And as the sister alluded to up there, it seems like you just can't get information on public things in Memphis. So is there a way that we can help to mitigate some of that, to open it up some more? Because believe you me, if we had more transparency, we probably wouldn't have had the incident on the bridge. If we had more transparency with Memphis Police Department, we probably wouldn't have some of the tension that we have right now. But evidently there's a problem. So help us to better understand how we can better equip ourselves as journalists as community persons to get things more open?
Do what you were doing, bombard them with your activism and your questions and freedom of information requests. That's what we do. Just keep bombarding them, don't stop. That's what you should do. That's one of the ways.
When you were talking about going before elected or state office holders and expressing in a unified way your concern, that certainly is part of the solution. And I think you did the right thing, and I think it's wonderful. And you're absolutely right. It's not just our reporting, even though in my narrow focus world, as far as the product is concerned, I just think we've been chewing on this for years, and now some good things have happened and some not so good things have happened. But really, when the people come forward collectively and express your opinions, that is the most powerful thing that can be done. And when you talk to the lawmakers who we've talked to over the, what's going to change? How are we going to get this? Everybody's saying, well, we can't release it because the statute won't let us release it. Well, what are you going to do about it? Those are important conversations to have. And really, they're used to butting heads with us. And so I do think it helps when new voices come to them as well and say, what gives? I think that's important.
One last question? Right, last question.
So I think everybody on our panel and everybody that's in the audience is a critical thinker. I think we also understand...
Is a what?
A critical thinker.
Okay.
I think we also understand what it means to frame questions. So when we constantly say, well, when I ask members in the community what are they worried about, and they say crime, well, you don't get good news. I'm not worried about good news. You're framing a question to get certain types of answers. And I'm not saying that that's the exact question, but that's how you've repeatedly framed how you go about deciding which stories to cover in your news. But also, from that standpoint, we're also critical thinkers because we're able to think beyond what does it mean to be afraid of crime in our communities. So when we're saying, I live in this very impoverished area that also has high crime because those maps are identical in our city, I'm afraid that my kids might not be able to get a good quality education. Let's talk about that. I'm afraid that, my job keeps me away from the home and I'm working 3 different shifts. I'm working 18 hours each day because I'm just trying to stay afloat to take care of my children in my house. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the fact that we have people in these communities that don't have the workforce development skills that they need, and we have resources in our city that can actually help prepare these people so that they can get better paying jobs, so they can go from 18 hours to 8 hours of work, and they can spend more time actually helping to raise their children and families. Let's talk about that. Let's not just stop at, hey, we have a crime problem. Let's show these pictures of black people that are alleged robbers or alleged murderers. Let's actually, if we're saying we want to address the things that people are worried about, let's actually address those things. And I think you have a lot of people that are in your newsrooms and that are sitting in these meetings and going out on assignments, and they want to cover the types of stories that are really going to address the things that people in our communities are worried about. And we have people like you who I think, unfortunately, because we stop at, well, they're worried about crime, so let's talk about it. I think we have people like you that everybody's just asking, let's just think more critically about the stories that we tell and what it is that we're actually trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, if I can say, that wasn't the only question that we asked of these community groups. One of the questions that we also asked was, what do you love about your community? What's going on in the community that has you excited, and what are you happy about? And we get story ideas from those as well. We don't, the reporters and the producers who are in the editorial meetings are responsible for bringing ideas to the table, and we listen to them and what they have to say. We're not out to say, okay, well, you get this crime, you get this crime, you get this crime, you get this crime, because that's all our audience wants is crime. That's an oversimplification of what we do, and we have talked about job development. We have talked about how does the city better exploit their own resources, such as the incredible water aquifer that we're sitting on, and in industries all over America not having enough water to do what they do to bring jobs to the community. We talk about the food deserts. We talk about a lot of things. It's not just about crime. And look, I get it. We're an easy target because we do talk about crime a lot, but that's not the only thing we talk about.
I can't remember the last time I've been with an audience as challenging and critical as this one. And I want to ask you guys to thank our panel, which has been fully responsive. Thank you guys very much. And Brandon, sorry for mangling your name. I apologize. 10-minute break, 1:30, we're back. Thank you. Well, my name is Memphis, so I apologize. I'm sorry. Anytime. I knew better, and then I...
Thanks for being here, bro.
Yolanda, good to see you. How are you?
Fine, I don't really do
Thanks for
Yeah, hey, I thought you did well. I love your common sense and sensibility. And you're there asking questions that we all want to know.
Seriously, thank you. Thank you.
That's what makes you good. Continuation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no.
Hey, they're good. Yeah.
That's why I was recording. I was like, come on.
Right there, wasn't it? Invite you to come down the other.
I mean, come on.
You know, it's a tough crowd. I'm wrapping you up. Thank you, guys.
You're right.
Look for a collaboration.
All right.
Look, I wasn't making a mistake. That was just an observation.
We may be recorded.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks a lot, man. Appreciate it. Thanks. Good to see you, man.
But you would know the thing talking about you. See, he said something about me, and he started saying,
I thought
Nice to meet you. What's your name?
They telling me that Stacks is in big town, and I'm living a block away. This station is said that a couple of them. I'm telling you what I'm seeing.
No, I understand exactly. I hope that we never did, and if you had, you definitely should have called us and let us know.
That's all white haven and stuff. You saw what happened when I said that.
All right, I'm going to say hey to you.
Hey, Greg. You rolling? You got work? Oh, shit.
No, I'm gonna stick around for a little bit.
I clean it up, man. Don't worry, I clean it up.
No.
Good to get everything.
And thanks for my phone too.
What you said, they protested?
That's what we heard. Somebody's going to protest.
Protest there.
No, not the external protest for the fact that they're not going to protect the city. I got to go outside and see this thing.
I guess that would. What is your time? Which is
Hey, Marvin, back here. Box 13. Good to see you.
How do I want to do this? You need to flip the best microphone.
I'm going, but I'm going over my boss's seat.
Says that was my former boss.
Before I came here, I used to raise regular relations.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. I went to Auburn, so yeah. So I knew about. I used to watch WTVM in college.
Phoenix City and Columbus, Georgia, so we took a job over there.
Great community.
Justin, they were first starting out. Justin, good to see you. The pieces they used to make Arrow and
Oh, American Apple.
yes, they just started all.
So you saw a lot of me on that.
Yes, I saw they used to, you know,
Yes.
That's a good question.
Yes.
I have another attorney who said that he takes search warrants.
Well, thank you very much. We're glad to have you here in Memphis. Sounded pretty good that time.
All of them do except for this one, and no one can figure out why. Listen, not here. I see you. In person, yes.
I saw you in New Orleans, right?
Yes, yeah.
Hey, Rob. Thank you, good to see you. Nice to see you. Yes, come in.
Back here. Good to meet you in person.
I may have you use this one. Just because you're sitting in front of this one or this one. Okay, let's see.
Look, that's mad.
Should have switched my voice.
Test.
See, I'm not getting anything with that one. I can't find our AV guy.
You go with the lavaliers and then.
I can't. You know what? I could put one of those on.
You can
That way
walk around.
you have your hands free.
That probably makes it better. It's cool.
Okay.
That's right.
Honestly, you guys, y'all are sitting. You could share
could
this
do
one.
that.
I'm good.
You do whichever you prefer.
There's so many.
It's on.
I tend to bellow too. Now, it's nice to meet John.
Andy, great to meet you.
Test. Test. Test.
Sir? All right, y'all ready?
Yeah, let's do it. Mike's real live.
Careful what you say.
Whatever you say is being recorded. I don't think this might be quite as reticent a panel as some of ours. I could be wrong.
Make sure your phones are off or on vibrate.
Well, I was like, let me answer that question.
We're going to let you answer that. I'm going to take up Bruce's and say, you know what? Here's a way to follow what's going on. Here's a way to join up with these
Yeah.
Did you enjoy your time in New Orleans?
I did. I was I didn't get to. There was so much good stuff this year. You know.
Did you go last year?
No, I didn't go. I hadn't been in a couple of years. There was so much good stuff, and I didn't get to every panel. And my husband came with me, and of course he was just in the hotel room, you know, chilling. And we didn't even get to get out and enjoy things as much as there was.
I had actually made very careful notes of that.
Junior in high school, and we get to camp. He plays football, and we just, story.
Did I see pictures?
Yeah, he's
a chair.
yeah, it's been crazy. I mean, still, you know,
Lawyers stand at one end. That's no.
season. So
Yeah, you know, we lawyers in this room, we got
in the spring and summer, there were camps or unofficial visits and unofficial visits. But like that, we had two places and there, and they were going. My husband was like, "This is really not everything." He was going to come with us. And we were driving to one speaker. Then come back and give me out.
That's why we're here on the left.
my son plays football, but he doesn't play anymore. He's at the senior team. He was never.
So, what are you working on?
Same thing I've been working on for months. Violent crime. He's going to job. That's why I was asking about that medical exam stuff. I challenged him. I think I'm going to. I don't think about it already. And by the way, it's been.
I think actually there was a reporter, Nick Morbido in Johnson City at WJHL who had ran into something similar with medical examiner reports. He was actually looking at death by the drugs, the opioids, and so he was looking for autopsy reports. Here's your autopsy reports, right? Yeah, so he was looking at prescription drug deaths. I'm trying to, I need to go back to my database.
They might be able to pull a rabbit out of their hat.
You know what I think he did? I think what he was trying to do, because he was trying to get lots of them. Sorry, this is he was trying to get lots of them. I think what he wanted to do was inspect them. He was doing the inspection but they did a lot because they had them. I think they were at East Tennessee State, and so that's in Johnson City. But I think they were getting them. I need to look back. I had this query in my database. I keep that stuff and just remember the details of it. But that's the last person I know who's had the one.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to pick up again with our final segment, if we could please. As you probably had a hell of a day so far, in my opinion. But we're going to close with, we got a nice chunk of time here, an hour and a half. We're going to spend with some good lawyers and some good journalists on how to use access law of various kinds to do your work as journalists. I have a hunch we may spend a lot of time on public records, but we've kept it fairly free form. What we're going to do, I'm going to very quickly run down, or let the panel run down themselves and explain who they are, but then we're going to do very brief segments on a couple of big access law issues, and then I've got a shotgun kind of topics that we're going to address. So I'm Lucian Parra, Adamson Reese, do some media law work. I'm your moderator for the next hour and a half.
My name is Rob Harvey. I'm a trial lawyer with Waller in Nashville, and I do a lot of IP and media work.
I'm Deborah Fisher. I'm the executive director of Tennessee Coalition for Open Government. I was a journalist for 25 years. I'm not a lawyer, but I do.
But she plays one every day.
I do try to sound like one. No. So we obviously focus on education and advocacy related to public records and open meetings laws.
Mark Pereskia. I'm a projects reporter with the Commercial Appeal.
I'm Matt Gearin. I'm the managing editor at Fox 13 here in Memphis, and was a reporter before moving into management. And I got to work with many of the great journalists here on the street before that, so that was great.
Zanetta Lowe. I'm a consumer investigative reporter with WREG Channel 3.
I'm Andy Wise. I'm the chief consumer investigator for WMC. I'm not a lawyer, but people think I am one.
Yeah. All right. What we're going to start with is several sort of broad topic areas. We're going to start talking about. We're going to talk about access to courts. Rob's going to cover that, and maybe a smattering of stuff about undercover work that reporters can do and the law surrounding that. I'll talk for a minute or two about the Meetings Act. Deborah, not being the lawyer, but being one of the most knowledgeable people in the state of the Public Records Act, is going to talk about open records. All this in an introductory way, and then we're going to get a little deeper into specific topics. So, Rob, the short course.
Great, short course. So I've got on my First Amendment hat and wearing my Second Amendment tie in 5 minutes to cover access to courts and court documents and also some wiretapping and intrusion issues. So with that, we'll start the egg timer. So generally, never take no for an answer. So dealing with courts, we almost always start with what's called the quartet of Supreme Court cases. Back in the early 80s, the Supreme Court actually would regularly take up media law cases. The pendulum has swung the other side, not so much anymore, but we have a series of cases that have allowed us to have access to transcripts, to search warrants, to grand jury transcripts, on some occasions, access to courts. And the Supreme Court and also the Tennessee Supreme Court have articulated a series of pretty rigorous procedural guidelines. So you start with the quartet, and then you also start with the Tennessee Supreme Court decision in State versus Drake, a 1986 decision, which we have relied on for years and years. And start with the proposition that you are entitled to be in court, unless you're thrown out by a lawful order, Do not disregard a lawful order, except that you'll be subject to contempt and imprisonment. You may decide that that is good for your reputation to get thrown in jail. I have carried a toothbrush to court a couple of times, but have yet to be thrown in. So start with the proposition that you're allowed to be in there. If a closure motion or other restrictive motion is made, you're entitled to raise the state versus Drake procedural requirements. And essentially what that means is that there's supposed to be a motion on file for at least 3 days. It's supposed to be a written motion, although that's not always followed. Lots of lawyers don't know the Supreme Court rules in this area, and a lot of judges don't know this area of the law. So it's supposed to be a written motion. The clerk is supposed to give notice, but they're not obligated to. Lucia and I regularly beg court clerks to actually make a call to the friendly reporter to let us know, give us a heads up, and some will and some will not. There has to be a court hearing. The judge has got to consider facts and has got to decide whether there are sufficient facts and no other reasonable alternatives to court closure. The judges also will consider the same sorts of issues in connection with court closure, protective orders, sealing of records. It all gets jumbled up, and so the courts really are dealt with a series of cases, not all of which they know how to juggle. You also have the Tennessee Supreme Court Rule 30 that deals with cameras in courts. A lot of trial judges in Tennessee think that Rule 30 applies to court closure. It does not. It only applies to recording devices and cameras. And you all have to be the experts on Rule 30 because you can't count on the defense lawyers and the trial judges to know the rule. With the State versus Drake, we have been able to expand it a bit to apply to any restrictive order. So when judges nowadays are facing sealing motions, we're trying to use Drake as a procedural lever to make sure that we get notice and we have a chance to object. In connection with, so I guess the bottom line with courts is don't take no for an answer. Expect to be given access to court. Follow lawful orders to be tossed out. And if you are asked to leave, say, Judge, would you please take a recess? Let me go call my newsroom director. Let my newsroom director call my lawyer. Let us have a chance to come in here and intervene because the Supreme Court says we have a right to be here. But don't throw yourself, against the jury rail to hold your ground. On wiretapping, the United States federal statute as well as the Tennessee statute are both one-party consent statutes. So if you are a party to a phone call, you have a right to tape record your phone call as long as you're not doing it for a otherwise tortious purpose, and that's an unreasonably vague term, but as long as you're engaged in First Amendment constitutionally protected news gathering, you will be okay if that is your defense. About 15 states have two-party consent. So you need to consider, please, when you're making a call or receiving a call as a newsroom participant, where's that call, where's the other end? Remember the Kanye West, Taylor Swift dust-up. Remember, for those of you who are, well, there are not that many people old enough to remember, the Monica Lewinsky tape recording a number of years ago where her calls were recorded from Maryland.
That's sad. People in here are old enough to remember.
Well, she's back in the news. She's been on TV recently. We have a First Amendment constitutional protection to play recorded conversations under Bartnicki, a U.S. Supreme Court case. So if you are given access to a recording, you need to talk to your newsroom director about whether you're going to use that, either newspaper or television. And your newsroom director may want to call the lawyer to make sure that Bartnicki will apply. But if you're in network news for television, you need to be aware of the FCC beep tone requirement. And that simply means that you may not play a recorded phone conversation unless there's a beep tone or unless you get specific consent. We'd argue as lawyers that you get implied consent. If they know that they're talking to a reporter, they ought to know that there's a good chance that there's a recording going on, but don't count on that. So you need to have explicit consent or the beep tone. One way to a lot of newsrooms will show the program is they'll put the transcript of the conversation up behind the anchor's head without playing the recording, and that's one way of not getting an FCC complaint. On intrusion and trespass, just last week, a couple weeks ago, we got a case where just the action of the television news reporter going up to the front porch of the person to be recorded, door opens and she's talking through the door. You can't even see the person who's on the other side of the door. That attracted a trespass and intrusion upon seclusion claim. Now, I'm not going to predict how it's going to turn out, but the lawyers in that case on the plaintiff's side were able to go in and get a prior restraint injunction with no notice to the news folks. So the judge, out of the blue, and he's a good judge. I was really surprised that he did this, but he issued a prior restraint, thinking that there might be a news program coming up. So just be aware that as you're going about your daily activities, there are all kinds of unexpected claims that can come up in the intrusion realm and eavesdropping. So just please be aware. Make sure that, if you're going to be doing any recording or surveillance work, keep your newsroom directors advised, and your newsroom directors will make sure that the legal team is advised as best they need to. So that's 5 minutes.
That's amazing. All right. The Open Meetings Act, and hopefully as or less time, as little or less time. The Open Meetings Act means that citizens, any citizen, including reporters, can have access and must have access. Meetings must be open. Of governing boards, that's the term under the statute. That's really one of the key points in the statute. That is to say, is a body a governing board? City council, county commission, certainly. These are boards who generally derive their legislative authority, their authority from the state law. They have to be empowered to make a decision. So one distinction, for example, is if the president of a university appoints a search committee to go out and make a recommendation, they don't. They derive their authority from an executive, the president. They don't have a power themselves to make a decision that's binding on anybody. So that will generally not be governed by the Open Meetings Act. The Meetings Act has a big exception for the attorney-client privilege. It's a little narrower than the ordinary attorney-client privilege, and it's much abused, and I mean much abused. But that's the moment when you call your news director or your editor or whatever and see what you can do. Sadly, often there's not much your lawyers can do about that, but it's in any event, you just need to be aware it's there. There is the sort of biblical injunction that ties, I think of it as biblical, ties the Open Meetings Act, because I remember it as wherever 2 or more members of the legislative body are gathered, there you have a meeting. And it's not written quite that way, but it's essentially, it's a loophole closer. And what it says is that chance meetings, essentially, if you do business at them, that's a meeting. You can't do business at chance meetings or whatever. So the bottom line is 2 members of the county commission can't get together and talk about, and deliberate toward a decision on business. And so I would talk about it as too loose a way even for anybody to talk about that. You have to deliberate toward a decision. Okay. So again, there are all kinds of shenanigans that go on to get around that provision. I think what else? Oh, the other thing you need to know about the Open Meetings Act, another reason it has very little power is the remedy. The remedy is a do-over, essentially. You can say, well, whatever they did in that meeting, well, it's not binding. And unless you're a bond lawyer and want to somehow challenge the legitimacy of an action to issue debt or something, okay, whatever they did in the meeting, if you're reporting on it, do you really care about that? So it's very hard to enforce, is the bottom line on that. So that's the sad report on the state of open meetings law. What did I miss? Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I mentioned attorney-client privilege. What you'll see in those situations is if they're talking about litigation, it has to be pending or contemplated litigation. There actually has to be some litigation. Surprisingly, in our community, a number of public bodies do not abide by that, but nevertheless. And then what can be discussed with your lawyer is getting legal advice. You can't deliberate in that session. Now, good luck parsing that out, right? What's supposed to happen is they're supposed to go get advice from their lawyer and come back out in public and deliberate toward a decision on whatever is going on that they took legal advice on. Again, I jumped over that because it's very, very, very difficult to enforce that. I'll stop there.
Well, I just want to throw in that the one way you can tell that they have deliberated is if they come out and take a vote without any discussion.
Nothing happens.
So then you can challenge it and say we're going to have a do-over on that.
Right, of course, absolutely. So, Deborah.
Okay, and it may be, the Open Meetings Act may be difficult to enforce in a court of law, but it can be very effective to report on it. And sometimes you can get, and oftentimes you can get attention that way and public opinion to create a change within the governing body itself in terms of how it operates. So don't give up just because you're not going to take it to court, because there still can be things done.
Reporting on, actually, it can be a more effective tool to report on a closed meeting than to file a lawsuit.
Right.
And not to mention which, of course, you can get some of the people that sometimes are in a closed meeting to talk, interestingly enough.
That's true.
So.
That's true. Okay, so I have a quick on public records law, and they're somewhere between 350 and 400 exemptions to the Public Records Act. I'm sort of putting it around 375 now. We have to kind of keep increasing the number every year because the legislature passes some every year. But the good news is you don't have to know what all those exemptions are, because in 2008 we were able to get some changes in the law that instead of someone saying, no, you can't have that, prove to me, where it says in the Open Records Law that that's a public record. Now the law says that it's a public record unless it's exempt. And they have to, and it's written in the law, give you the legal basis for the denial, meaning they have to cite the statute. And I always tell reporters who call, tell them to cite the actual statute with the number, TCA, whatever it is. And you need to get that. They are required to give that to you. Sometimes it's not going to be a statutory exemption. There are other exemptions, and you heard about one today, the investigative exemption that we know about. That's actually not written in statute. The lawmakers never passed anything that said you cannot have access to police records during an ongoing investigation. That actually has come into the law in a different way through court rules. So anyway, but it's important that you ask for that, because sometimes when you ask for that, they don't have a reason. They just say, that's our policy. That's not actually a legal basis for denial. And so that's your first step to kind of pushing back if you can't get some information. The other thing I wanted to, just since we don't have much time, but I wanted to, since we talked a lot about police records in here, I did want to talk about that investigative exemption. And the thing to remember, and I don't think we actually heard it from General Wyrick, but that's actually discretionary. Police can give you information. They can give you documents. They can release dash cam video, and guess what? They have. And they can release body cam video, and guess what? They have. So you have to understand that is not against the law for them to release that information. It's discretionary for those kinds of records to be released. So that's important, because that does mean that you can argue why something is in the public interest to be released, and you can point that out in any stories that you do. I do think that there are issues with the TBI exemption, and that is something that, there was a bill that came up last year to change that, and not to give citizens a right to the information in the file, but instead to give the discretion to the DA to release that.
And those bills weren't passed, but they are probably back on the table this January, right?
I don't know. I mean, probably. I think that there will probably be some kind of effort with the TBI bill. And the same thing that you should know if you don't know already, is that there were efforts to look at body camera footage legislation, and essentially there were a couple different bills, but it would have actually, instead of saying it's a public record, said that it's not a public record and you have to go to get a court order to open it up. So a lot of states have passed unfriendly laws related to body camera footage. But what is going on right now, and this is that there is a study underway about what kind of access the public should have to footage, and hopefully there will be a hearing or some other method for public input into that. And I hope you all cover that and explain the case. Talk to people in your community who are interested in it and explain the case for that access.
Well, I hope you all, if you aren't covering it, attend and state a position with respect to the need for transparency on body cams. So, if you're a journalist, get time off, if you're not covering it. Seriously, because they need to hear from folks in the community. Let's talk for a minute about, and then I'm gonna get these guys involved. One more lawyer question to Rob. Tell us the current state of the law on body cam footage. Let's assume tomorrow, and I don't think, have the body cams actually been deployed in Memphis? They have been, haven't they? All right, so okay, fine. So you want body cam footage. One of these guys. So, and they won't give it to you, and they come to you and you say, "What's the state of the law? What's the state of the law?"
Well, our argument will be that a body cam is just a day in the life of a police officer, and it's not investigative footage simply because the officer's wearing it. However, if the governing body of the Memphis or Shelby County Sheriff's Department or Police Department wanted to declare it to be investigative records, they can do so. And so
assume it's a traffic stop or something bad happened, and so they got charges pending against somebody, right?
That's right. Under Criminal Rule 16, the police department has the discretion to release it or to claim that they're not going to give it to us right now. Under the Vanderbilt, there's a 1986 decision that declared that to be the rule. It was affirmed last year by the Tennessee Supreme Court in the Vanderbilt rape case. What we're trying to do in the Vanderbilt rape case is say that third-party materials scooped up in the investigation are not falling under the work product rule of Rule 16. And the Supreme Court said, yeah, we're going to go ahead and declare that anything basically in the police file is an investigative record if the police want to declare it to be so.
Now, Matt, you were nodding your head earlier. Anybody else, any of our other journalists, have y'all had made requests for any body cam footage or even dash cam footage lately?
I have. I don't think we've seen or had any requests come back for, and I've put in requests for just give me 2 hours from this precinct just to see what's out there, just as tests. Nothing's been released as of yet.
Have they denied?
They have denied, and part of it is we were playing with. This was before we knew where they were as well. So I mean, we had sources tell us they were out there. They were being tested. I mean, a test under our the way we looked at it, a test should be public record if an officer's out there wearing that. So we wanted to see that. We feel like they were playing a little bit of games with it. And that's the challenge you get to, though, is, okay, is this the one we're going to get the lawyers involved in? Or are we going to, because there are some resource issues with going that route. But I've had zero luck so far. And I know other people have requested as well. I see Brad nodding his head over there.
But they denied you access to it?
Yes.
What did
They have denied us. I know that there have been situations where there was, under the open investigation.
Could they point to an investigation?
And you guys jump in on this. They are broad with that in Memphis. They will use it on any, even if there's the possibility of an investigation.
911 calls.
911 calls.
Any sort of reports that you might immediately request beyond an incident report that you can just go and get yourself. They are routinely using that as a tool to say you can't have it.
The other piece of video you got to remember that's been in Memphis for quite some time is the surveillance video, the Blue Crush cameras. For example, there was a situation on Beale Street where people thought they heard gunshots, started running. We requested that video because there are, I think, at least 5 cameras in that location. Open investigation because they were investigating whether or not there were gunshots. So videos not released.
So in a situation like that, and we're hearing this all over the state, and not just in Memphis, and I think that when I see the news reports on it, you hear everyone sort of accept that, well, it's under investigation, so okay, we don't have a right to see it, and I think my question would be, is there a way to press on that? Like, what is the investigation? How long is this going to take place? How would it harm the investigation if this is going to be? I mean, maybe we need to start asking those kinds of questions to make them justify. I mean, similar to the Vanderbilt, case when, how would this actually hurt the investigation to get that out?
Well, let me narrow that question just a little more. I mean, because sometimes I've been involved in situations where about an investigation, and so from that knowledge, you're branching out and asking for records of various types. Okay, so they say, well, yes, there's an investigation. Or maybe you don't know there's an investigation, but you know about some conduct that might be investigated. So they deny a record based on the existence. They say, yes, there's an investigation about that. But if you don't know the scope of the investigation, has anybody had any success saying, well, okay, justify your denial and tell me what's being investigated? Have you had any success with that?
I haven't ever been denied a request, but I haven't requested body cams either.
Well,
you're not requesting enough stuff.
I think right now
I can expound upon that in a little.
It's so difficult to get any kind of answer out of the Memphis Police Department. And it's kind of like customer service at its worst. It's kind of like everything is automated these days, and so it's like the way public requests are made in. Well, let me just give you a little history on this, is that it used to be, like, I've been at the commercial appeal 27 years, and I'm getting old there, but it used to be you just went down to an office, I did this way back in the 90s, and just whatever you asked for, you'd get. You'd right there on the spot. In fact, the law is written that it's records on demand, essentially, that a citizen has a right to go in and inspect during normal business hours. But so much has changed that over the years with, between identity theft and, other complicating issues, Social Security numbers, HIPAA. There's a numbers of things that it's all been, now it's to the point where the city wants to manage information so intensely that all records are, it kind of mirrors the federal system in that you have to make a formal request through a digital pipeline. It's a site that they have, and you make this request, and they tend to follow the law. Sometimes they don't, but I mean that they're supposed to respond within 7 days, and if they need more time, let you know. But I mean, there's no give and take in the system. It's just you're dealing with some anonymous email from somebody who.
You go on a website. There's what they call a portal, right? You type in your request, whatever, and then some unnamed, faceless person on the other end of the internet tubes responds.
Exactly.
You first get an automated response that says, I've received your request. And then within a few days, so that the 7 day is met, you'll get another response, either asking for more time or, whatever, so that legal requirements are met. You get those. So the law is being followed in that case. The human beings technically behind the portal are from the legal department, but your request could be going to, any number of agencies,
department head or something like that.
Departments across the city, right? So it could be MPD, it could be HCD, say for somebody like me, or any department. And just going back to this, and Deborah and I have talked about this recently. It's not things that aren't necessarily a request for records are being pushed and sort of funneled through that. Now, I will say, I have the best responses that I've gotten have been opportunities where I had a chance to communicate either with the department or the person involved prior to that request. They know it's coming, right? That's who it's getting funneled to. I had one just the other day, and it wasn't controversial, but they said you still need to send it through the portal, right?
But let me pick
Got
up
it,
on that, yeah.
And they knew it was coming, so it immediately came back to me. But what if it's not that way, which happens all the time?
Because on the same topic, because I think this is going to feed into what you're saying, I'm very concerned. We're seeing a move, and I knew this from the last administration to now, where the public relations folks from the city are handling this. It's not going through the legal department. They're involved, but it's not going through legal the same way it used to. So these are people that are really not familiar with open records law. Yeah. Especially with the police department. Police department is pushing everything through open records. Can you tell us how many people were carjacked in Memphis? Well, you got to file an open records.
Let me back up a step from the Memphis situation just generally and get to Zanetta's point earlier. I mean, my experience, and you guys comment on this, whether this is your experience, is that when you can have that dialogue, when you can say, well, what I'm looking for is something in the 1997 Memphis city budget, right? And and you can talk to somebody who knows how the budget works and where the files are and all this, then you got some chance of finding what you want because you can have a dialogue. In other words, that would be your preferred method, I assume, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think a lot of times, with the exception of some of these much more, recent controversial, I'm not talking about body cameras, but let's say it's something that's, a general request. I think you have a much better opportunity, and I've had much more success when I'm dealing with the person either in the department or let's say I want something. I was looking at, we did a story several months ago and looked at a bunch of records about tickets, right? Both moving and non-moving violations. Well, the stuff that got spit back out to me, I mean, we're talking, thousands and thousands and thousands of lines that I had to clean up, but that was okay. But once I actually talked to a human being in the Traffic Citations Bureau, a sweet woman. She said, oh, well, we sent you the wrong part on that one. I don't even know why they sent that. Let me resend this, and then you can still convert it if you can, or maybe if I have time to, throw it in Excel for you.
That may have been the most interesting call she had all day.
Right. So that was great. And if you have an opportunity, whether it's that person or if you get really lucky and you're asking for some kind of electronic file that nobody knows, I don't know how to do that. If you can get on the phone with some IT people, this happens much more on the state level, I think, than locally. But I've always had more luck that way. But they're also screening that. Let me say that too. It's not just those requests, it's phone calls. And I have gotten a sense, and I'm sure others have in the room, that even for people who want to say, oh yeah, I can give that to you, or sure, let me just point you to that presentation, blah, blah, blah. You'll notice everybody CC'd on emails, and even they feel a little hesitant, or have jokingly said, or not jokingly, hey, I'll get in trouble, so let me make sure I copy so-and-so on this, or send that, but I'll still make sure I get it to you.
Rob had one, for just 1 second. Just for those who haven't done a lot of public records requests, keep this in mind. That is to say, before you send your records request, think about a few phone calls. Think about a little investigation, because it will, in my experience, make it go ever so much easier. So, Rob.
Yeah, Zenetta's point is one that I wanted to make, that if she calls the lawyers, we might get you the records, but it's going to be no time soon. So something I told an investigative reporter years ago is, I can teach you nothing about charm. So Zenetta's using her charm, and she's going to figure out a way of getting the records that she needs. Another point I think we wanted to make about the investigative records is, y'all have, all the working journalists in the room know, if you're making the request, and it has to do with a request that will make the police look good, I encourage you to make plenty of those requests. Let's start getting the police inculcated with the idea that we can release investigative records if we look good. If the police want your help finding the shooter at a local convenience store, they will release that investigative record within seconds because they want your help. So they're using their discretion to give us records that A, make them look good, or B, will assist in their investigation, and they're denying us the request as a general matter. And I think what we want to do is have a, we're not there, we're not an arm of law enforcement, we're not an arm of the criminal defense bar. We're there to be the neutral third party, but we need to be very, very proactive in getting investigative records whenever and wherever we can.
One of the things I've had experience with too, on your point, is the best open records request I've ever, the ones that I've gotten that have led to the best stories come from tips. Yeah. Where you have, we've all dealt with whistleblowers that are telling you, you need to ask, you need to ask for this. It is there. And we're at the point now where if we know that, if we get confirmation that the document exists, last week we broke a story on Thursday about a settlement in a police-involved shooting. We didn't get the settlement yet. We knew it was there. We got enough information to confirm that. We did the story, and kind of, you get to that point, and then everyone starts calling. You kind of force their hand. And that's a tactic that we've used recently.
I want to come back to the micro part of the law.
Yeah, and we all got it at the same time. Yeah.
I want to come back to the micro part of the law in a minute, but I want to go really broad at this point. I think the longest serving member of the panel, years in service, might be Mark, 27 years. Is that about right? Not to point fingers. We'll start with you, but I want everybody else to answer this too. I was talking with an audience member, and she commented that, let me paraphrase, things are bad and getting worse as far as public records and access general. But let's focus on public records. Take whatever length of view you want to. Are things getting worse? Are things getting better? Are things staying the same?
Oh, they're far worse. They're far worse on many fronts, and I don't know. I'll just give a few examples. It was, one of the things that I'm kind of frankly surprised that we let go was the 911 tapes, because, there's for, the electronic media, they're so important, but they were important for us too. And I remember years ago, I could see this slipping. It was back in the 90s, and I used to get in arguments. I don't know if any of you all remember Chief Duggar. He was like this really strong, and just go toe to toe with him, yelling. I'd go down there with a micro cassette recorder and say, I'm going to listen to this tape, and I'm going to record it because I have a right to do it and cite the law and all that. But somehow or the other, just from personally, I got involved in really long-term stuff where I wasn't involved in the daily grind anymore, and somehow or another, we lost touch with a lot of that. Now, granted, we have far fewer resources. I know the newspaper, we've had so many cutbacks over the years that we just don't, part of it is a resource issue. We don't have the money and, to, pay our lawyers, and Lucian does represent us, to take them to the mat. We used to sue. We used to file a lot of suits, and we used to win a lot of suits, I want to tell you. But that tended to keep them honest because they didn't want that to happen. But it's kind of like, the cliche, the perfect storm. But, so many things have happened over the years, and between identity theft. It used to be that, if you wanted email or, police reports, all kinds of things, you would just get them on the spot, on demand. But now, the record keeper, rightfully so, I think, says they have an obligation to go through and redact Social Security numbers, and a lot of it. Sometimes I think they abuse the law. They go far beyond. Like there was a law, and you lose track of this over time too. But I know that there was a law introduced, one of these exemptions years ago, that gave exempted home phone numbers for police officers, with the theory being that, you know, a criminal defendant could go find them and kill them or something. But then the governments started expanding that on their own to where they'll redact anybody, you know, anybody who shows up in whatever report they've got, you know, be it an employee or a citizen, whatever, they'll redact phone numbers, dates of birth, all kinds of things. And this HIPAA thing too, I don't know if you know what HIPAA is, but it's federal medical privacy. And I think that's widely abused too. And I'd like to get a little bit of refresher from the lawyers on that, because I believe that HIPAA only applies to healthcare providers and not to the government. But the government routinely cites HIPAA as reasons to deny access.
It's a little more complicated than that, but you know, I mean, I do remember we had a case once where we got legitimately under the Public Records Act some health benefit information from the city about a city employee of some note, and promptly the next year an exception was passed into the Public Records Act saying that those EOBs and such, they're secret now. So there's a combination of some exceptions, and I don't think HIPAA technically applies to, say, an employer's records of health. I could be wrong about that. Does it? Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, it doesn't apply to. It is true. What Mark says is true that there are some medical records in the hands of government that, because of why they're there, HIPAA may not apply to. But the problem is, you got to be damn near a HIPAA lawyer to figure that out. It's just a complete thing. Yeah. But let me keep going down the line here. Current state of the long-term weather on Records Access, Matt.
It's bad, and I think there's this false sense of transparency that's out there right now, because you know, it used to be that, you know, there was newspapers and TV stations and radio stations, but now you have, you know, and the public affairs officers aren't, or public relations officers, they aren't just spokespeople now. They're doing their own newsletters and they're pushing out their own information. And I think the elected leaders, the government appointees feel like that's transparency.
Well, I love Mayor Strickland, really. Jim's a friend. But he's done exactly that. He has posted significant documents with respect to big developments, notably, for example, the selection of a chief of police. He's posted them on the web instead of releasing them to the newspaper, or done so simultaneously. So
that's one thing, though, posting that.
Get out of dealing with the, as he called it, the traditional media by going directly on the web. There's no question of that.
Which is fine, but that doesn't.
Unless you're traditional media. Are you traditional media?
No, we're a digital media company.
Oh, sorry.
That's a good answer.
But it's last week they were putting out some information about the animal shelter and I think in their view, to push back on some negative stories that we're getting, and it was percentages about the kill rate. Well, I don't want percentages. I want to see raw numbers. Well, you got to FOIA that to get them. They're happy to give you the percentages, but if you want to dig deeper, if you want to get a bigger report, I think that's complicating things. But overall, I think it's pretty bad right now.
Real quickly, because I don't think Andy said a whole lot. I think we have a little of both. Yeah, I absolutely agree, the false sense of transparency. But I will say this, for FOIA and open records, it's not necessarily that it's great on the state level, but I will say this. There are databases and places that you can search for information that I did not have when I first started out as a reporter. Where some stuff is readily available. So if you learn how to use those tools before the incident happens, then you're out there on a story and you know how to run to that, you know, whether it's OSHA or the EPA or the CPSC and again, those are all federal. But even on the state level, learning how to read audits and where they are, things that are put out there electronically that certainly weren't at my disposal when I first started as a reporter. But the flip side is definitely the false sense of transparency. We're putting it out there all for you to see, or, you know, even things like how many people visit the, you know, open government websites, or look at our checkbook, or, you know, all of that stuff is fascinating. But, you know, to the average person or even a reporter trying to get to more critical data, that doesn't necessarily answer those questions. And I think what I'm seeing is the roadblocks. They're definitely, the people on the other side are making the roadblocks tougher to get across.
So Andy, you've been quiet because the weather on Union Avenue is so good, right?
Well, it's fun. I'll use your weather analogy. I have a sunnier view of public records. I've had my problems with public records too. In fact, when I did my 911 investigation last year. It took 6 months to get some records on trends in particular areas of town. But on the flip side of that is because we're in Tennessee and because of the sunshine laws we have in Tennessee, I've been very successful, and also because of personal source relationships. For example, my Durham bus investigation, for example, that's a private company with a public contract. Well, because I know the law and because also of personal relationships with school council and also, professionally dealing with the professionals at Durham, I was able to get the complete bus list of these private citizens who are privately employed by Durham, their addresses, their phone numbers, where they live, and actually, and also run background checks on them to find out what their criminal histories are. You try to do that in Atlanta, that's not going to happen.
Well, let's take a detour from the weather report for a minute and tell us about, explain to people who do not understand how you would have gotten private records of a private company, how you got those under the Records Act.
Well, I appealed to the Records Act under the grounds that they're under a public contract. And I also use the expression that it's in terms of the public transportation and safety of school children who are part of the public school system. I never got an argument on that.
And just to tie it down from a legal point of view, there's a case from 2002 called Cherokee, or Memphis Publishing Company versus Cherokee Children's, thanks to the work of Mr. Karaskia, where the Supreme Court decided that if an organization is the functional equivalent of government, then its records are public. So Durham, well, they're the school bus company.
Right. That used to be a public unit of the public school system.
Right. And Durham initially tried to put up a fight, as a bluff, but they didn't put up much of one because they can't.
The only part of the weather forecast I think there can be no doubt about is that part of the law is actually significantly better in Tennessee than in many places.
Oh, yes. We did the same thing with Laidlaw when Laidlaw had the school bus contract. And I have a colleague who works for Fox 5 in Atlanta. I said, you ought to do this because Laidlaw's got the Atlanta. He goes, Andy, I can't do that. The Georgia Sunshine laws would never let me touch that kind of thing.
And that's something that even the lawyers in the room who don't do public records work, should be aware of, because you do think that as part of your litigation toolkit or whatever, you can go get records from the government. Well, you can also get records from some folks who work as the government on contract.
Right.
Deborah, one thing many people in the room may not know is about TCOG. Tell them about TCOG, and as a predicate, then I want you to talk about what you've learned from that in terms of what's going on around the state on open records. First, people need to know what TCOG is and why you get calls.
This is my advertisement.
Yes, it is advertisement.
No, we're.
Should I disclose that I'm actually president of this organization?
Yeah, both of these guys are on the board. TCOG is Tennessee Coalition for Open Government. It was founded in 2003. It's a nonprofit, nonpartisan, one employee, me, big board. These two are on it, and we have a lot of media representation on it. But we also have, it also has citizen groups and individual citizens. So the League of Women Voters, ACLU has a seat, the Beacon Center, Tennessee. Yep. So it really does cross, and so mostly what we do is we. Track and research public records and open meetings issues, and I do education. Also run a helpline. All of this is on our website, and the helpline number is on the website, and I do answer it because I have talked to many people in this room, and I do media interviews. I mostly just Skype with the people in Memphis, though.
Two of the resources that everybody in the room ought to know about, including working journalists, okay, and even not just citizens or whatever, are Deborah, as a representative of TCOG, who can answer and help with some questions on the Open Records Act. The other is the Office of Open Records Counsel, which runs out of the Comptroller's Office, and they can be helpful.
They can.
But back to TCOG for a minute, and let me pursue the shameless plug for just a minute. Bruce Moore on the last panel talked about the fact that we've got to get stronger. We've got to get more vocal. We've got to push harder on access. I hope everybody on this panel would agree with that. There's TPA, there's Tennessee Press Association, there's the Broadcasters Group, there are all kinds of industry groups of that nature. But there's also TCOG. TCOG has done a better job of being an umbrella group pushing these sorts of things. And I urge you to hook up with TCOG, to sign up for the newsletter. Join as a member if you want. But it is going to be in the next few years, thanks largely to Deborah, pushing more for these kind of changes. We've got to do some changes here. But last question on the weather, Deborah. You get, because of what you just said, you get calls from all over the state about records, meetings, and stuff, don't you? How many of those calls you get?
Did I log Almost 300. I'm trying to
I
remember
think it's-
last year.
yeah, I thought it was
I
300.
think that was it. Yeah.
So,
300.
I mean, it's an enormous number from all
Right.
kinds of big and small places, I would say. So
Right.
tell us about what you're seeing, what's happening around
Right.
the state.
Well, we have had a lot of questions and I've been doing this almost 3 years. Right.
Yeah.
So, but I have seen an increasing number of questions about police records and concern about police putting out their own information and bypassing the media, making it difficult for media to get certain stuff, but them sort of controlling the narrative about what they put out. So we've gotten lots of questions about police records and what they can do. And I do try to advise people on other tactics to get stuff besides just sometimes when the law is not always in our favor. I also get a lot of questions. I get a lot of questions about email access because that has risen in sort of interest level from media groups. I get a lot of questions about access to economic development information, incentives that are being given out and difficulty in getting that kind of stuff as well. And I guess that's probably, they really run the gamut. And we get a lot of questions about open meetings and mostly from citizens and concern about not getting, believe it or not, there are towns there are places in Tennessee where you can't get minutes of a meeting, where notice is not very good, where you can't get an agenda packet before the meeting to look at what's on it. Y'all probably don't know this in Memphis because you probably have pretty established, but out, in some of these places, citizens have a really difficult time finding out what their local government is doing.
Let's talk about electronic records for a minute. Let me talk to the journalists first. How important these days is it for you to get records that are kept electronically in that format?
Well, it's like Mark said, we're digital media.
Yeah.
Our deadline is now. So it's important that we have as instantaneous access as possible on news of the day. Now, it's for long-term projects, not necessarily, but we don't want those long-term projects being longer than they need to be. I can't emphasize enough the importance of fostering the human source. Now, I have the luxury of 19 years in this market, and Mark, for example, 20-some-odd years. But to give you an example of the value of earning trust with source relationships within government agencies or private organizations, for that matter, I can run a car tag within minutes. Statutorily, I have no right to that information under the privacy laws.
I guess we're going to have to start being nice to you.
But I have 36 sources who trust me implicitly who do have statutory access to that information, and they get it for me, and they know that it won't be attributed to them, and they know that chances are I don't need to attribute it to anything because it's a means to an end. That's an example of how important combining the electronic access with the human source is.
What about email? I assume everybody, at one point or another, needs email from some public official. How's getting access to that? I can remember it hadn't been more than, within the last 2 or 3 years, the city of Memphis would be producing email in the following method. They would go find the 1,000 emails that responded to your email request. They would print them all out. They would stack them on a city attorney's desk. That city attorney would go through them and highlight them with a black magic marker, and they would then PDF them, and they would produce them to you in what they then considered electronic form. I know. So have things improved?
I think that I don't have any problem getting an email response from. And
I don't mean email response. I mean email records.
Oh, email records. Yeah. In the time that I've needed to get email records as it pertains to something, I have not had that problem. But I will contact a human being first before I make that request, and it's going to be someone who has had a personal experience with me in news coverage, who can lead me to someone who they can say, look, get Andy what he needs. He's going to be fair, and that's the only way I know how to do it.
The last set that I got, it was electronic and they were fairly worthless, but that's neither here nor there. But,
you got it though.
But yeah, they were electronic. It took a little while, but that was that. I did want to mention one other thing on electronic records that I think is a benefit to reporters, both mainly us, but absolutely those that are out there every single day. The other reason getting them electronically is so much better is that it allows you to look for patterns and trends. We were talking about just a minute ago, even looking at the criticism of, just kind of the single focus, here's what happened. The ability to be able to take a step back and look at what's happening, whether it's in a community or, all sorts of issues. Electronic records allow you to sort and to, look at things and move things around. So I just wanted to throw out there that's one benefit, because that's what I'm always looking for, is a pattern or a trend.
Financial report, a budget, or employee, you get it in a spreadsheet that you can then.
Or if it's something that I can put into a spreadsheet,
right.
or,
Right.
even if it's, not in the prettiest form, as long as I can have a little time to finagle with it. Again, a lot of folks don't have that kind of time, so it'd be even better to have like that. That tells a much bigger picture story, and I think that's helpful for the viewer.
Mark,
Okay, regarding
I was going to call on you anyway.
Okay, I beat you to the punch. Regarding email, I think it's another area that's entirely broken, and I'm not sure there's a way to fix it. And when you're trying to investigate a wide swath of information, a source isn't going to be any help at all. You're not going to get months and months of email from somebody. It just isn't going to happen. And I'll give you a good example of something that I found very disturbing is when I was trying to figure out, Josh Pastner's contract, University of Memphis, and I was dealing with the University Counsel's office on that and exploring different threads to that story. One of the things I was doing is I asked for different emails and learned when going through these, they printed them out. It took weeks and weeks, and I got a stack and was going through them, and it became clear that what they were doing was the University Counsel wasn't the one who was vetting it. They let the individual, like Tom Bowen, they just asked him, athletic director, say, give us your emails on this. And you could tell that because all the emails were forwarded from like Tom Bowen to Ingrid in the counsel's office. And so when I asked them about it, they admitted that that's what they did. And it became one of these things that, all right, so if you're investigating somebody, you're under that system, you're essentially letting them do the investigating. It's ridiculous. And frankly, I think other agencies are doing that as well, because this email thing, see, the thing about email is it's become the modern form of communication. It used to be that people wrote letters, they did correspondence and whatnot, but now all of that is done through email, and we're not tapping that, we're not getting that in any kind of clean, efficient way, and I find that really disturbing. But I'm not sure what you can do about it because of all the privacy considerations, and they invent privacy considerations. They let them go through their email and say, just give us the stuff that pertains to this, don't give us your private, and they've told me that we're not going to give you his private email, even though it used to be the rule of thumb was if you put something on a public account, it's public information. And that, when I was looking at Bob Corker, when he ran for Senate, I was able to get his entire email thread on everything. I'll tell you, it was some really embarrassing stuff in there. When he was mayor of Chattanooga, right. Yeah, he was the mayor of Chattanooga. But so much has changed in that area, and it's just, and it's between not having the resources or the time to fight them and not having the money to take them on a mat. And you get a different, constant new generation of people coming up with new excuses. It almost seems like a lost cause, frankly.
I want to follow up on something Mark said. For everybody in this room who's under 35 years old, you listen to Mark say email is the preferred form of communication, and you think that is hopelessly quaint. Well, I'm over 35, and that's how I communicate. I won't text with my son, but text is the preferred manner for anybody under 35. Wouldn't it be a great public record story to figure out all the texting going on during a Memphis City Council meeting, from the lobbyists at the back of the hall to the council members at the front of the hall? I'd love to see some request on a hot topic about that. I don't know if it's ever been done, but I'm not, I probably would bite my lip about what you'd find out. But I'll bet you there's some great news stories just bubbling around the cauldron of a city council meeting.
I also think with emails, though, they've figured it out.
Yeah, that's what
They know that it's public record. Yeah. And I've done our team has done several this year, and we've seen a pattern. For example, we did a story on it. We did an Open Records Request Act for emails over a 1-week period during the sewage line break. Over here, there was nothing said. Aside from it happened, there was a short video, and then over the rest of the week, and if they're staying true to the request, there was no communication over email.
And that's an excellent point, too, because they're probably using private accounts, which I know a lot of them do, or the texting route, too. So.
And the other thing I noticed in that last set, I was about to use the jargon, they're hip to it, because the other thing I one-line emails that even said, let's get lunch. We need to grab dinner. We need to talk. And nothing else was said in the email.
Let's talk about the law for a minute on this, and Rob, to help me out here. So, all right, Mark wants, all of some, person in the city administration's emails to and from a certain person over, a 2-month period. And they print out the PDFs, and they give you a stack. And you say, no, I want the emails. I want them in an Outlook file format. The city uses Outlook on. Are we entitled to that?
Well, it's an argument that's still going on. The law does not require the government agency to give you government information in the format you demanded. But they're also not allowed to create impediments.
Well, what about a spreadsheet? Suppose it's a document I want that's, it's a simple simple financial report, but it's set up in a spreadsheet, and it's, it's not ginormous or whatever, and they print it out and give it to you. You say, no, I want the Excel spreadsheet. And you say, well, look, it's a different document. Paper here, the electron. I want the Excel spreadsheet. I don't want the damn paper. Are we entitled to that?
As your lawyer, absolutely.
How much will it cost me?
Yeah. The example given a little while ago about the Durham Bus Company. I'm surprised that they didn't say pound sand. Sue me. Right? Because they know that the result will be the media entity incurs a lot of legal expense, and they also know that the way the Public Records Act is set up is there is very little chance that we're going to recover our attorney's fees. I think in the last 5 years, the only attorney's fees cases I can recall where the requesting party received fees were public citizens who made the request. Because the judge is going to have some sympathy for that person, but for somebody representing the commercial appeal, the Tennessean, or the news stations, like the last speaker, y'all are just with these big shot media entities, and everybody in the room goes, wait a second, you're talking to the wrong crowd on that front.
So, all right, well, let's keep going down the electronic line for a minute. Assume that the city official whose communications I want does, in fact, use their personal, a Gmail account that appears to be their personal account to communicate on some city business. Can I get those personal Gmail emails?
And again, as your lawyer, I'd say yes. And we'll get some support from the Office of Open Records Counsel on that front. That if they're using a personal device on government business, that it is a public record, regardless of the Gmail account or Microsoft account, whatever it is. However, getting those items is nigh impossible. Just look at the Jeremy Durham, State Representative Jeremy Durham story that's bubbled out of Franklin, Tennessee for the last 8 months, I guess. Requests were made early and often for his texts and his emails, and he was obligated to turn some of that over to the Attorney General's office, or at least the Attorney General, having subpoena power, was able to get it from the third-party providers, the internet service providers. But the newspapers and TV stations were basically told to pound sand.
Well, we've had a little bit of luck. The commercial appeals had a little bit of luck getting some of those kind of emails. But they've also run into the situation where, city, if it's city employee and it's their personal email account, the city may take a position, it's not our problem. We're not the custodian. That person is, go talk to them. Because they don't control the server, they don't know the account, they don't know the password, and you do have to have some sympathy with them on that subject. On the other hand, if the person's their employee doing business for the employer on some private either device or account, one would think, if that were my law firm, I can bloody well tell you we would be able to go get that damn email from our employee's private email account. I mean, one way or another, either they'd be gone or we get the email. I mean, that's sort of silly. But I'm just saying that's another complication. Let's talk about costs for a minute. Tell me problems you've run into in terms of costs of getting public records. We'll start with you guys. I mean, have y'all have run into any issues of that nature?
I have not run into any significant costs. Of course, I'm not paying the bill either.
I know Zanetta can tell some stories.
I haven't had prohibitive, where we can give it to you, but it's going to cost this, and I haven't had that experience.
Rob, we talked about this earlier on the phone call. Obviously, the DCS case. I mean, that was
well over 30,000 was the
85, I think.
85.
Give a little detail, a little sense of it.
We, along with several other entities, but the Tennessean, were trying to get access to information and records about children who are deceased, and
who were under the care of DCS, right?
Yes, who were under the care of DCS, and the question was about whether them being deceased was the exemption to the exemption, which Chancery Court ruled in that way, which is now also, now you can see those records online. They put them there without names and without counties, much to my dismay. But because we fought for that part of it in particular.
Without the county?
Without the counties, that ended up being because we were fighting so hard for. I mean, ultimately, to me, it was about the babies who were dying in Shelby County. It was about nothing else. But without, because anything that allowed a person to be, it was distinguishable, a county.
So it helped identify who the person was.
It helped identify who the person was, although they were deceased. So anyway, now they put online, not only as policy, but also law, because of John DeBerry, how many have died, and they do quarterly updates, and then the records are uploaded in PDF files, and you can take a look at them. The interesting part about that, if you've done it enough, and for any reporter out there, if it's a high-profile case that you guys cover on a daily basis, a high-profile, a situation where a child was murdered, something that you've covered locally, there are enough factors in there that you recognize. You can go back and easily, it's hard to search through the number of them.
That in public, I mean,
now
they'll redact even more.
Well, y'all deal with that how you want to. But I'm speaking to the reporters in the room who need quick information. But that was what it was about, and we got into a lot of debate about redact. Oh, maybe that was the 30,000. It was going to not only the copies, but it was going to cost them X amount to redact. And some of the records had to be transported from, certain counties to Nashville and blah, 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 blah.
So who pays for the redaction then under this scheme? The requester, right?
Right.
Not you personally, right?
And didn't we asked them about electronic redaction too, the ability to be able to go in and redact it electronically, and there was a whole debate about that. But anyway, we ultimately got those records. I've also run into some, definitely not as much here locally, but with the Department of Human Services looking at daycare records, mainly because all of those files are still paper. And so even if you're just paying for the employee's time, if they have to pull a paper file and then redact that, you're paying for additional costs. I've gotten around that by scanning or just going to inspect and writing. So you can use any of those tools at your disposal to try to get around.
Let's talk about those two things you just mentioned: inspection versus copying. Talk about how that works.
Well, under the law, I guess it was back in 2008 that they passed the law that allowed labor fees, and that really is it was actually an effort to reduce fees, but after that, the schedule of reasonable charges was drawn up that allowed labor fees over the first hour. However, there's a safety valve in our law. I like to call it a safety valve that you cannot be charged anything if you just want to go in and inspect. There was a big effort. I expect it again next session. I heard about it already. To change the law so that they could charge labor fees when you come in to inspect records. And the reason being that they have to compile the records, maybe make copies and redact them and do everything they would have to do except actually go to the copy machine and make copies for you. But they incur the labor charges anyway if you come to inspect. But we killed that bill.
But let's back and make sure everybody's on the same page. You got two rights under the Act.
You got
the right to inspect, to go to the office and inspect. Clearly you got that. They can't charge you for that. The law's clear.
Right.
You got the right to get copies of public records. And they can, as you say, under the schedule, charge for that.
Right.
So if I'm getting records from the city of Memphis, and I got to go to their portal, and I got to type in all this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, can't I just say I want to go down to City Hall and look at it? I mean, don't I have a right to do that?
You do. You have, and that would be an option.
But you don't. In practice, you don't. You don't.
You can
I'm
say
telling you.
Most people don't want to go down and inspect, but you do have that option.
But so they charge you. They say, well, it's going to be this credit that's going to be $1,000. So can you then say, well, I'm not paying $1,000, but I'll be at your office tomorrow morning. I'd like to look at it.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's what people do. Sometimes if they give you such a large charge, you're like, well, I cannot go to my editor and ask for, or my, news director and ask for $1,000. They would laugh at me.
You bring a smartphone with a scan app and you scan the documents.
Well, we're going to get to that.
Well, yeah.
Hold that thought.
All right. Well, I was going to talk about that too.
Okay, well, go ahead then. Go talk about it now. Can you bring all of us, almost everybody? There
has
are
a phone.
more cameras in this room than people, right?
I think more agencies are keen to that, or letting you doing that. But I know that just a few years, actually, I'm losing track of time, but maybe like 5 years ago, the then Memphis City Schools. How long have they been merged now? I don't know, but we were inspecting phone records for cell phone usage, and they had. We were sitting at a table, me and another reporter, and we pulled out our phones to take pictures of them, and they almost had us arrested. I mean, they had like
that was after,
five security
as
guards.
I recall the story, that was after you guys had asked for photocopies, and they said, yeah, that'll take about a week and a half. And y'all's solution to that was that. But why can you not, I mean, so do we know legally whether you have a right to...
Some agencies will let you and some won't. Like, I know that Internal Affairs for MPD, they used to not let you do it, but now they've reluctantly thrown in the towel. I know that second hand from another reporter. I haven't had that experience. But I mean, I think it's taken time. A lot of these agencies won't. I don't know. What's
I think it depends on the detective you got.
Yeah, the Office of Open Records Counsel says on this that there's nothing in the law that says a local entity can't prevent you from taking pictures with your cell phone of records.
Nothing in the law. Okay, so that means they can prevent you, right?
Yes, that's
she says she's not a lawyer, but here she is. She's
no. So that's been a real frustration, and that's and so when these local entities prohibit that, they say, well, this is what the Office of Open Records Counsel has told us, and it needs to be challenged, probably.
What's y'all's experience?
I use my scan app all the time, whether it be at the courts or MPD Central Records or whatever. One time, someone said something to me, and I told them to pound sand, and they didn't contest me on it. So,
all of those places he just mentioned, yes, IAB files. I have not been able to take my phone, and maybe somebody else in here recently has, but not personnel records, which are located at MPD, are different, but not IAB files. Now, as far as the other stuff that I was talking about, when we're talking about state agencies, I mean, I took a laptop and a full-blown scanner, and I was like, y'all just let me know which days Miss Janie is available, because I'm here. We're not, okay, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, all right, we'll pack it up, we'll be here all day. What time do you take your lunch, Miss Janie? And that was how we did it.
With the internal affairs, those of you that haven't gone through that process, because all the reporters are nodding their heads, yeah, but you are brought up to the whole floor, this sixth floor. You're met with an investigator who makes you sign this big book. Yes, and then they sit across the table from you and watch, and they're generally pretty nice about it, but it is a little bit of an intimidation factor when you have to go and inspect these records.
We've been talking a long time, and I haven't been ignoring questions if there were any questions. I'll just stun.
Well, if I could just add a comment, you guys have been great as always. But I think Memphis police is tough, but not every agency. I've been here a year and a half. Not every agency in this county is difficult. I feel like fire department it helps you. I feel like the sheriff's office is usually always pretty helpful. So it's not there are some. Not all agencies are you have the same.
But doesn't it depend on the story you're working?
That's true. Yeah.
But some are better than some. It definitely depends. Some are better than others, and I will say this: some are extremely. The level of responsiveness. Let me say that, regardless of the story, they know they have a dutiful right to follow the law, and so the level of responsiveness. We've received this. Is much better.
Well, let's do something radical for a program like this. Pick your favorite public.
Oh no!
Not for doing bad stuff, but for doing good stuff. Who do you, when you know you got to get a record from somebody, who do you say, oh, that'll be easy. It'll be nice to talk to them again.
I'll start. I'll make it easy. University of Tennessee at Knoxville. Now, the media entities that I represent haven't been kind to UT Knoxville on many occasions. But in dealing with the lawyers, one of whom is a former partner of mine, you can actually have a discussion and say, you know what, my request, my reporter's request was actually for 200,000 records, and we don't want that. So let's talk about how to slim it down. Let's talk about how to make the email search. Here are the knockout terms. Here are the terms we want. Let's take out the word. And so you can actually negotiate with those guys. So not that, FERPA gets thrown up in my face every single time I make the call, so that's the exception that they cite. But at the other end of the extreme, they actually are willing to negotiate. And I love public agencies who are willing to say, you've asked for too much, and now you've asked for too much. Let's work together collaboratively and slim it down to 10,000.
We actually talked about this very concept in, I guess, the Advisory Commission on Open Government, and in looking at, I don't guess it was the we need to talk about this legislation that was passed this year in a minute. I'll get back to that. But the notion that if we really wanted to fix the public records law, wouldn't it be nice if you institutionalized this response? Wouldn't it be nice if there were not just a public information officer, but a public records concierge for citizens and for, I'm serious, where you go to them and you say, hey, look, I'm looking for information about this budget line item. Can you help me? And they say, why, certainly we can help you. Let me look it up, get back with you. Do you want this or do you want this? Do you want electronically, PDF, Word? What do you want? I mean, they work for us, don't they? I mean, seriously.
That would be nice.
Okay, I'm dreaming.
I'm not going to pick my favorite because I don't want to make anybody. I guess I don't care about making people mad. But let me just say that I have had positive experiences even with the agencies that don't do a good job. So instead of picking an agency, I'll pick a day. I was doing a story, a quick investigative day turn that we had another reporter on, a general assignment reporter. They were kind of covering a crime story, but it was about a housing community. So I was taking a kind of a bigger picture look at crime within that community and other subsidized communities nearby. So Cyberwatch just wasn't giving me a whole lot or what I wanted, and it wasn't, it just wasn't working out real well. So, but within, trying to work around those resources, which I think is also important, to talk about workarounds. Because that's what everybody needs on a day-to-day basis. And by the end of the day, I had info from a federal agency that deals with housing. I just picked up the phone and said, hey, by the way, do y'all track this? Yeah, we do. You think you can send me? Yeah, I'll see what we can send, and I wasn't hoping for it. But not only did I get it, but I got a spreadsheet, and it was in color, and it was highlighted by, subsidized community. And so not only did I have that stuff to look at, but talk to people over at, I'm thinking of the person's name, but anyway, because the police department couldn't necessarily help the group that they're right across, Crime Commission. Oh. Anyway, so great stats from them, because the other thing, besides patterns that I'm looking for, we like to deal with apples and apples, right? Not to just say, oh, this happened here and then this happened down the street, and so 10 robberies there. You want to look at apples and apples. And so by the end of the day, I had the Crime Commission stuff, the HUD stuff, and MPD came back and said, you'll have to file an open records request for the rest of it, but we have a snapshot for you. Now, it was after 5 o'clock, but that was okay. It was an effort to say, here's what we can give you. If you can say this amount of months versus that amount, you can file for the rest, but we can give you a snapshot of Part 1 crimes. And so that was a good day for me, on a quick day turn, but a deeper dive into a bigger story, and everybody was helpful.
And it does go back to one of the morals out of this last period is human contact,
yes.
Right? Not just resources, but information, rather, but communication about narrowing a request or not, and then about what you'll take instead of what you've asked for, that sort of thing. All that helps. I do run into a lot of people, citizens or journalists, who kind of have this notion that they just make a request and kind of drop it into the ether. And clearly that is not the optimal approach. But, new law, and Deborah helped me out on this. This year, a new law was passed by the General Assembly that requires, as I read it, every state and local governmental entity or agency to adopt a public records policy, to appoint a public records
concierge.
Yeah, well, not exactly. Custodian.
It's a great title.
It's a coordinator.
But I'm going to start calling them concierge.
It elevates that role too.
It's more friendly.
It's a way to kind of curry favor. Anyway, and they got did I say adopt a policy? Anyway, so, and just before leaving that thought, keep in mind how many of those, I don't have a clue how many of those there must be. I mean, we're talking tens of thousands.
Tens of
Everything.
definitely.
You know, tiny town water utility with 3 members or whatever, right? I mention that because they are all required to have a policy in place by July of 2017. The Office of Open Records Council is working on a draft policy, a draft model, thank you, and some best practices. TCOG and others are working to help move them in a good direction. We hope that might have some effect. But watch the agencies you care about as reporters the most for some little item coming up at the bottom of their agenda where they adopt a new records policy, because they will certainly have the opportunity to tinker with expenses, for example, charges and such, but also about how they respond to records. These policies are not permitted to be, what's the word? They can't go sort of below what the state government, more burdensome than state law requires. They can't create new exceptions or stuff like that. But although who knows, some may try. But in any event, when that comes up, if you regularly cover, you know, the town council in, I don't know, whatever town, you need to watch for that on their agenda, because you may have the ability to have some input, some impact on how they, what they adopt. I'm particularly thinking about charges. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, but.
Right. So this is your chance, and this is actually something you can do for your community. And I know it's interesting to hear the journalists, you know, when you have relationships and these things aren't problems for you, it's hard to get too excited about it if they're problems for other people. But this is your chance to really inform your community and make sure that they can, you know, be at that meeting. But yes, the local governing bodies, which is your city council, or a school board, will adopt a policy, and they will have the opportunity to put in their policy that they could waive all labor fees if they wanted, or they could cap, you know, the amount that they would charge for labor fees. They may say, we're not going to charge anything more than $100. They could put anything like that in their policy. They could say, we're going to allow people to take photos of public records. That's going to be part of our policy. They could say, we're going to accept email requests for public records, which some school boards across the state require you to actually be there in person or send the request through a U.S. Postal Service. So they could do some of these things that are causing problems in their policy. It's not required by statute, but there is some latitude as long as it's not more burdensome than state law for them to do it. So this is also my plug. I meant to send this around. If you want to sign up for the TCOG newsletter and get updates as news comes along, it might alert you to when some of these things are happening. But it is an opportunity, and I know you don't have an SPJ group here in Memphis except for the student chapters, or chapter. But it is an opportunity for you as journalists to get together, even informally, and even with you know, some of the citizen groups in town, and say, hey, is there something that we need to do for transparency? They could even adopt policies that we're going to put all these certain documents online and make this easier. But this is the time to do it. So
one other plug along the same lines. You should subscribe in one way or another, whatever method you choose. I get it by email and look at it occasionally, to Deborah's blog at TCOG, and she keeps us very well informed about what's going on around the state. As a working journalist, frankly, I think it's well worth the, I don't know, few minutes a month it would take you to see stuff like that, and I encourage you to do it. Beyond that, tell her what's going on. If you hear something interesting, if you get weird pushback from some agency, or if you have good luck on, as some of our guys have talked about down here, pass that along to Deborah, because I have a feeling that what's developed during her tenure at TCOG is that I think she's really the best clearinghouse for this, for journalists in the state right now, and you can build on that. Yes, please.
I know last year the state comptroller's office was going around the state conducting these meetings, and one of the things that they were looking at was charging a fee to inspect. Where did that go?
Well, because of the and were you in Jackson? Yes. Right. Okay.
Unless you were driving all the way to Jackson.
Yeah, we tried to get them to. By the way, Lucian tried very hard to get them to have a public hearing in Memphis, and they would not do that. I tried my best to shame them into like, Jackson is your idea of dealing with West Tennessee? I love my friends in Jackson, but give me a break. He's doing the same for the body cams if they're going to have hearings, but I don't know if that's going to. I'm hearing that may or may not work out.
They say they don't have space. That's what they told me.
Yeah, state space. Anyway, in answer to your question, first day of the session, the state representative had the bill, pulled the bill, and basically said, you whipped us, that was it. So the public response to that, I guess the lesson is, the public very much believes in, and I know transparency is a catchword, but they very much believe in being able to know what their government is doing. And so once we could get that message out in terms of how this would shut down access, the public was very much on our side. And I think the same thing will happen with body camera footage if the public can know what's happening. And I'm not sure they quite do. We actually did a poll on body cam footage and asked Tennesseans how many people supported a citizen right of access to body cam footage, and 89% of Tennesseans said absolutely. We came back and asked another question about, well, what about should they wait until after investigation is over? Still, the majority of Tennesseans still thought that there should be access to body camera footage. And the final question we asked was on 3 questions, which would you identify with? That police should have complete discretion on when to release the body cam footage, that citizens should have a right to access, or citizens should have a right to access unless a judge said it will interfere with the investigation. And only 12% agreed with the statement that is the law now, which is that police should have sole discretion.
Yeah,
only 12%.
Let me put a little more fine point on last year's, the feast and inspect thing. I only made one of the sessions, but I kept very close up with what went on. And you can comment on whether Jackson was this way. But as Deborah said, people came, TCOG did a lot, and the journalism groups did a lot to generate people to come and testify. And that was good. There were a lot of journalists, a lot of editors, TV reporters, all kinds of people showed up from the meeting. But there were citizens who showed up because they saw it and they were upset, and they had an experience or not. There were also several politicians we saw. I remember one in Nashville who I won't name, but there's nothing bad about what I'm going to say about him, but he's a very avowed Tea Party activist. And he has said a number of things, controversial things, publicly, that tie to that sort of part of the political spectrum. And he got up and he went off on how this was a terrible idea, an absolutely awful idea. And what I learned from that is that those of us up here who have very strong views about access to government, you may not realize that you share that view with a lot of people who are now activated the last few years of a sort of hard right or libertarian point of view. They distrust government intensely. And as a result, they want to know what's going on. I mention that because I think that the fact that the people rose up in those 3 sessions and killed charges on inspection, fees to inspect, I'm hopeful maybe if we play our cards right, we could make a lot of progress in the treatment of body cams. I mean, nobody is looking for unlimited access to every body cam piece of footage, from day one. Nobody. Not the ACLU, not TCOG, not nobody. But on the other hand, the current law means that you may never see a piece of body cam footage until a year and a day after the trial, after the last appeal in a criminal case. Yeah, okay, that's real accountability. And to come up with some compromise, the forces that believe in transparency are going to have to work on this. And so that's one reason we're pushing hard for hearings. And it's one reason everybody in this room, if you care about this issue, needs to find a way to engage with that too. Anyway, sorry for the rant or the homily, but anyway. Questions, yeah. Questions, comments. Contrary rants.
Well, I think, not that anybody cares what I think, but
we care. Exactly, we care.
Yeah. When we talk about dealing with certain agencies, organizations, public groups, I think the school board, the school board is one of the worst for me to deal with, to get information out of there. Anybody else have any better luck?
Historically, it's been, I haven't done anything with them, but I've heard from people recently, and it's just as bad as it always was. They always have the reputation as being the worst of the worst, hiding everything and trying to do anything to keep you from getting information. I'm trying to remember that bus story, the Durham bus story. It has been too many years now. How many years ago was
it? It was 14, 15.
Oh, okay. They really fought us on that, and it was crazy. I mean, I don't remember the details of it, but they're really bad.
They fought us on school drill records, and when we finally got them after threatening to take them to court, turned out they were falsified. And we wouldn't have known that unless with.
They were falsified?
Well, they were putting dates in on doing schools, well, days off. There were Saturday drills. So it appears principals actually went in and put incorrect. Our story resulted in a brand new system for how they do drills, but it was something they didn't want to hand over.
Yeah. Well, okay. Last round of questions. Wish list time. We'll start with you, Andy. If you needed to change, got the chance to change Tennessee access law in any way, any of the things we've talked about today, in one way, tell me what it would be.
I think that if there was some sort of uniform approach across all, from the state level down to the local level, if there's some sort of universal approach to how requests are accepted. Like the city has the portal, state agencies, it depends on the agency how they want it. I'd like to see some sort of a uniform approach accepted by all levels of Tennessee government in terms of how they can accept, how they would receive requests. I think that'd make it a lot easier because I think you would develop a centralized level of expectation.
Good idea. Good enough.
Along the
Think big.
well, okay. Oh, along the streamlining idea, just kind of going back to the ability to. When there is work involved for the employees, although I can ask them, give me the breakdown, use the employee that doesn't make as much. A serious way to, not that we're trying to break the backs of those government agencies, but to, if there's a way to cut out some of that so that we don't run into any additional time or certainly fees, but that middle process. I find to be cumbersome across many groups.
I have to say that was sort of the idea behind what I talked about as a concierge. So sort of lawyers, when we have disputes in litigation, we're required by courts a lot of times to meet and confer, to consult about our dispute, to narrow it, or, why can't, it's not just why can't we get along with the public records, why can't we go sit down and talk about this, right? I mean, that's part of it. Anyway, sorry. Matt?
I think, any law needs teeth to it. So what happens if you don't abide by this law? Nothing. I'd like to see some teeth.
Some consequence.
Yeah. Consequence.
What would you think about attorney's fees? Would that be good? A better attorney's fee provision?
Sure.
Rob and I would be all good. Mark?
I would grant me subpoena power.
He said they bit.
That's as big as you
The subpoena power.
There's so many things, but I mean, one that just comes to mind is, the TBI thing, which we touched on real briefly about how, it's really one of the most onerous laws in the country that all records by statute, all records of the TBI are sealed forever. So, this is what became public briefly with the Darrius Stewart case, is that they couldn't get access to the TBI file, and they wound up releasing it. But that all this investigative work that they do, working on all kinds of cases, helping local law enforcement with murder and investigations, corruption investigations, whatnot, it's all sealed. You can't see it. You can get records out of the FBI, and granted, it takes a long time and they'll be heavily redacted, but you get something, there's some accountability, but there's none with the TBI. It's just the most onerous law that was ever written.
Deborah?
Oh, do I get to?
Sure.
Oh, gosh. I think attorney's fees would be good, because I think then we would challenge more in court. I think that media organizations have, I think it would, if they had a chance to get their attorney's fees paid, if the government entity denied access wrongly, then I think that would help.
We're training you up pretty well as a lawyer here, I think. Anyway,
Well,
Rob?
I think consequences would be great, and I love Mark's point. I had this discussion with the newspaper
subpoena
editor.
power point?
Yeah, I had this discussion with the newspaper editor last week, so I was bemoaning the fact that it had taken us so much effort to come up with a handful of unnamed sources for a story, which we ran. And the editor said, yeah, and then the Attorney General came in, he had subpoena power, and he found 22. So I'd love that subpoena power too. Not going to get that far, but I'd love just greater access to get what we need for you all to do your job.
Any questions? Yes.
I'd like to add what he said about the TBI. The TBI, they investigate so many other things other than police shootings. Corruption of public officials is one big thing. And if we don't have access to that, then we're missing out. The public is missing
Well, you make the great point that when the blanket exemption was passed, the TBI had a very limited role. And today, the local agencies have decided it's a good chance to pass the buck to an entity that they think is very, very professional and has more experience at it. And I don't blame them for having that attitude, but that isn't what the purpose of the exemption was for to begin with. And we need to figure out some way of ratcheting that back.
Last question in the back.
I love the idea of attorney's fees. Is that on the table somewhere? And do you think that would realistically have any kind of deterrent effect or motivational effect on any government agency without spending their own money?
If you look at other states, the answer would be yes. Wisconsin's attorney's fee statute is so light that attorneys will take public records cases on a contingency fee basis. So you know it must be some money to be made.
But we have attorney's fees now.
We do, but the legal standard is so hard to meet that Rob and I, all of us who do this kind of work, take the view that it's very difficult to get them. It's just very difficult. But to answer your first question, is it on the table? No. On the other hand, one of the projects TCOG has undertaken since Deborah came on board, and we've broadened and reinvigorated what we've been doing, is to try to develop a sense of a proactive agenda. Every year, the TPA, the broadcasters, TCOG, others, are every year fighting new exemptions. So somebody will come in with a proposal to exempt this or exempt that. Okay, well, the notion is that we're trying to move to a place where we know what we want, what is needed to fix the law, to improve the law, so that when the time comes, when the moment comes, we can say, yeah, okay, we'll agree to that. You need to agree with us to go for these 2, 3 improvements in the law. That's one it's on our list, but there's no vehicle to put it on top, attach it to at this point. So, but it's on the wish list.
But you've litigated with the city of Memphis.
Yes.
For the same discussion. Do you think that the city of Memphis is going to be moved by the risk that they're going to have to be responsible for your attorneys?
Yes, I do. And I definitely do. I mean, in the past, it's no secret. I think that, as Mark said correctly, more public records lawsuits were filed. I think he's right that that's the fact that fewer have been filed, even with a weak attorney's fee provision, has had an effect on the willingness of public records custodians to tough it out, to say, yeah, sue us. Because if the chance has increased that somebody will not sue you, then yeah. So look, I'm not imputing any ill intent to the city of Memphis on this at all. Bruce McMullen's a fine lawyer. Jim Strickland's a good mayor, and I think they're within broad strokes committed to transparency. On the other hand, when we disagree about what's public and what's not in terms of a record, it would reduce their likelihood of fighting it if there were a strong attorney fee provision. I don't think there's any question about that. So anyway.
Even in a culture where we don't have the resources, as Mark pointed out, where they know that the suit is
especially because the point being, what an attorney's fee provision does is shifts the attorney fees to the loser, and so that's why he's saying in Wisconsin theirs is so strong that attorneys are willing to take them on a contingent fee basis. They don't require to be paid hourly. They say, oh yeah, we're going to get paid because we're going to win, and the law is strong enough to get us the fee. So yes is the answer to that question. We've even gone over. I apologize, but thank you very much for being with us.
I just wanted to, on behalf of the planning committee that's working on this, Ben Fox is the chair. We just want to thank you, Lucian, for starting this in 2004?
Thank you very much. Good job. Thank you. Appreciate your time. Thanks for having us.